rapidly approaching, and pretty soon you'll be seeing holidays like Christmas, New Year's, and even snow in the forecast. Well, if you want updates on the forecast this winter, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel down below for all weather coverage across North America, including southern Canada, the United States, and the tropics. Also, be sure to press the thumbs up button so I can keep you ahead of all of the snow and snowstorms across your area this winter. So, diving into the forecast, we are in an El Nino moving into this winter of 2023, and you can see that clearly across the equatorial Pacific here. Those warm blobs of orange just to the south of Hawaii is a classic sign of El Nino. A cooler blob of blue would signal a La Nina. So, looking here at the past few months, going all the way back to late spring and early summer in May and June, you can see we've been on a slow climb into El Nino land, and we are now approaching a strong El Nino status as we go toward the end of August here. And looking over the next couple of months, the consolidation of all of the climate models that we have out there, and you do see that a couple models are very bullish at getting closer to that strong El Nino status, while other models are more into that moderate La Nina status going through the rest of winter and into early spring of 2023. Well, no matter how you slice it, this is a classic winter El Nino pattern. You have the warmer air over the top from Alaska down through the Canadian prairies and across the northern United States, with the dry slot from the Ohio Valley down into the Mid-South, where an active and extended Pacific jet stream will be amplifying the storm track across the south, with wetter conditions, colder conditions, and more snow, perhaps, for the southern plains, the southeast, and the east coast, with more classic nor'easters potentially this upcoming winter. And going back, looking at the analogs for the past three strong El Nino winters from 1982, 1997, and 2015, the most recent strong El Nino winter, you do see they have been different in each of the individual winters here, with 2015 looking like a more of a mirror image to what we are seeing currently with the water temperatures out in the equatorial Pacific this winter. So let's kind of dive into the specifics and talk about what we can expect through this upcoming winter. Here's my temperature forecast for December here of this year. I do expect average conditions largely across much of the south central United States, with a little bit of a nod to slightly below average temperatures near the Gulf Coast from East Texas to Georgia and Northwest Florida, with the El Nino impact starting to shape up across the northern United States. Slightly to well above average temperatures can be expected in December from the Pacific Northwest eastward through the northern plains and into the Great Lakes region. Places like Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and even back towards Seattle could see warmer than average conditions going through this upcoming December. Looking at the precipitation forecast for December, I see an active storm track across the eastern areas from the northeast down through the southeastern states and even parts of the southern plains, with well above average precipitation favored here. More average conditions with a mix between drier times and wetter times across the desert southwest into the southern plains, and slightly below average precipitation across the Pacific Northwest into the northern plains, and then another area from the central Great Lakes down into the Midwest this upcoming December. Moving along to January, as we start the new year of 2024, I do see some changes coming, with more of an amplified El Nino pattern starting to get underway in January, with slightly below average temperatures across the Rockies into the southern plains and the southeast, more average conditions from California over the top into the northern plains, down into the Tennessee Valley and the Northeast, with warmer than average conditions likely across the Pacific Northwest and the Great Lakes region this upcoming January. The active storm track will start to get a little bit more widespread across the southern and southeastern United States in January, and this could be a big month for nor'easter tracks as well, from the southeast into the I-95 corridor across the northeast as well, with well above average precipitation and even some atmospheric river events possible into southern and central California, bleeding into southern Nevada and also Arizona going in towards the January timeframe. Average conditions for precipitation from the central and northern plains into the Midwest and the Ohio Valley, with slightly below average precipitation across the Pacific Northwest into the northern plains this upcoming January. Moving ahead to February, I do think this will be a big month for a cool weather outbreak across areas east of the Rockies, where we have a big storm track here starting to set up across the east. We'll get to that in a minute, but well below average temperatures across the Midwest, the Ohio Valley into the Northeast can be expected through the month of February. More average conditions settling in around the Rockies down into Texas, and then well above average temperatures from the Pacific Northwest down to the Pacific Southwest in our western areas into the Intermountain West through the month of February. Like I said, the storm track in February will be unique to El Nino, with more slightly above average precipitation from the Mid-Atlantic, the Delmarva region, down through portions of the Gulf Coast, including Florida, with more active precipitation here as well, and then more average conditions across a great area of the United States here across the middle of the country into the Northeast, and then well below average precipitation for the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast going through the month of February. And finally, our last month of March of 2024, I do think the cold will continue across the southern and southeastern parts of the country, with slightly to well below average temperatures favored for much of the Great Plains, especially the central southern Great Plains into the southeast. Some cooler weather could get into the northeast as well, with a little bit more of slightly above average temperatures up here into Maine, northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and upstate New York. More average conditions across the Four Corners regions, the upper Midwest into portions of the Great Lakes, and warmer than average again for the Pacific Northwest into the northern plains as we go through the month of March. And finally, looking at the precipitation forecast for March, I do expect well below average precipitation for much of the northern United States here. Again, another classic look at El Nino, with more atmospheric river events possible across Southern California into the Four Corners region and West Texas, and then an amplified storm track across the Gulf Coast and moving up the East Coast, with another classic look of a nor'eastern pattern potentially setting up later into March across the East Coast. So we'll be able to watch that as well. We could have some drought starting to develop up here into the upper Midwest and the Midwestern regions going into the early part of spring into March of 2024. We'll have to keep an eye on this, with well below average precipitation here across those areas. And looking at early winter severe weather setups, especially when looking at December into January, we could get these big low pressure systems that start to develop off of the Rockies and likely moving more east northeasterly. And usually stronger low pressure systems tend to move more further to the north. So that would pull a warm front further to the north, with a strong cold front attached to that here, similar to what we saw a few years ago with our derecho setup in December. And we have cool, dry, and stable air always behind a cold front, with warm, moist, and unstable air in the warm sector out ahead of the cold front and behind the warm front there. And we really have to watch these setups with triple point severe weather setups across portions of the Missouri Ozarks potentially as we go into December and January. This will be something to watch going into the early winter months. Otherwise, looking at my severe weather forecast for the entirety of winter, the key is down here in the left-hand part of your screen. If you're in the yellow, it's possible severe weather is a possibility for you guys. Likely in the orange, and very likely in the red, especially if you live in Dixie Alley and the Gulf Coast. Climatologically favored area for severe weather does look on par for this upcoming winter. And just looking here at the snow side of things, I know we're in an El Nino, but even Chicago, even when we see warmer than average temperatures across the Chicagoland area, for example, our second biggest November snowstorm back in 2015 with that strong El Nino produced 11.2 inches of snow, and that was the month that ranks as the fourth snowiest November on record, even during an El Nino that has been the warmest November as well. So that is something to keep note of, especially with the top November snowstorms in Chicago since 1884. That's when they started keeping records about this. And even looking at Chicago's top 10 largest snowstorms on record, you can see number 5 with 19.3 inches of snow January 31st through February 2nd of Groundhog Day there. You did see back in 2015, they saw a lot of snow with that system as well. Also, again, an El Nino year. So even if you have warmer conditions, you can still see it snow at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Definitely still a possibility. Just giving you an example up there in the Chicagoland area. And that system back in 2015 on Groundhog Day actually did produce a deep snowpack across the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the Ohio Valley, with even a very hefty lake effect snow band setting up across Lake Michigan here and the southern end of that lake effect snow band all the way down here into southern Indiana. So a very big snow setup that we did have back in February of 2015. Well, this is how I see it setting up as we go into this upcoming winter with heavy snowstorm confidence. This is for 8 inches or more of snow and one snowstorm here this winter. This is my confidence. If you're in the pink shaded color, that is high confidence, a 50 to 75% chance that you'll see an 8-inch or more snowfall in one snowstorm from the northeast down through the lower Ohio Valley into the mid-south, including Little Rock, Memphis, up here through Lexington, Kentucky, and New York City, also in the crosshairs there. If you're in the medium blue, that is a medium confidence, 25% to 50% that you'll see 8 inches or more of snow in one snowstorm. That covers places like Indianapolis, Springfield, Illinois, back towards just south of Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Fort Worth, and over toward the Nashville region as we go in towards that month time frame. And we also looking here at low confidence, essentially 0 to 25% chance of a big snowstorm of 8 inches or more, including Chicago, Detroit, down here into Atlanta, also as far south as the Orlando area cannot be ruled out. Houston, getting down into portions of the San Antonio area as well, with a very low confidence still, but it's still a chance of some big snows as we go later on through the winter. And looking at my official winter forecast for 2023 and 2024, I think here up into the Pacific Northwest, into the northern plains, including the Dakotas and Nebraska, it will be overall very warm, very dry winter across your areas here. So I don't expect a lot of precipitation. I also don't expect a lot of cool weather for you. Maybe some cool weather in the eastern areas from the Dakotas down in Nebraska initially, but most of this area will remain warm and dry through the winter. Very wet conditions for California, Nevada, and the Four Corners region here from Utah over here to Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. Atmospheric river events will be possible. We could have some snow, especially, as you know, in the higher elevations of the Sierra Nevada mountains here. Very active storm track across this region will result in very wet conditions this upcoming winter. I expect more snow into the central and southern plains, parts of the Mid-South, including Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and down here into the lower Mississippi Valley this upcoming winter. More snow than you've seen here probably in a few years across this region. I definitely expect more cold air into this area as well, which will lead to more snow across this region. A big snowstorm is not out of the question across the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, or the Ohio Valley. A big snow or two is possible, but overall trending drier this winter across portions of, like I said, the Chicagoland area, Indianapolis, Detroit, back over here to Lexington, Kentucky, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Trending drier, a little bit warmer this winter, but we still could have some cold snaps and a couple big snowstorms, which would get you just below average precipitation for this upcoming winter. A colder winter overall for the Southeast and the Tennessee Valley is expected here. That could be as far north as Virginia here or as far south as Florida. A lot colder of a winter. We're not talking about 50 degrees below zero wind chills down into Florida, but we're definitely talking a much colder winter for you folks down into the southeast. You'll definitely need your winter coats and your snow boots potentially in some of these areas, especially into the Carolinas as we go into that winter forecast. And then as we go into the northeast, the I-95 corridor, famous for big nor'easters, this could be a historic winter for you folks up here from Maine down through Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. We could be seeing big snowstorms, big nor'easters from time to time this winter with some big totals. We could be seeing a nor'easter or two that could produce 2+ feet of snow at a time across this region as we go through this upcoming winter, which could lead to historic snow totals once the dust settles later on this winter across the northeast, including the I-95 corridor. Well, if you want additional weather forecast updates, including this video, hit the description down below the video. The link to X is down there, and follow me on X at HWeather420. I do post on that platform fairly frequently. Otherwise, thank you folks for watching today's weather forecast, and I'll see you all in the next video.